You ready for me, Carol, to kick off?
Yes,
Oh gosh,
go ahead.
Thank you. I see some videos going on. That's always pretty exciting. Welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to our Courageous Career Conversation webinar this afternoon. Today our topic is on pay equity, equality, and demystifying compensation early. And we are very honored today to have Levongia Carrera, who is an SU Albers alum. She just said graduated in 2020. Whoa, yay. Who will be sharing some insights with us on this topic. And I also want to say a special thank you to our Albers Black Student and Alumni Council who are co-hosting today's event. So let me tell you a little bit, students, about Courageous Career Conversations. This idea actually came from one of our students who I think is actually on today. So nice to see Skylar with us, but it came back an idea that we approached the main career engagement office on and wanting to bring topics, career-related topics that are focused on DEI issues in the workplace. So in the fall, our topic was showing up as your authentic self. Winter quarter, we talked about imposter syndrome. And now today we will be talking about pay equity. So I know in today's presentation, Levongia is going to share a bit of her story with each of you. Then we're going to open it up to some Q&A questions and hope that with a small group like this, we can get a bit of a fireside chat going with you students. And thank you also to ABSSC for some questions to get us started to kind of warm up the group a little bit. But students, if you wouldn't mind keeping yourself on mute during the actual presentation, and then please, at any time, feel free to include your questions in the chat. Abby Barr on the Albers Placement Center team, and also Ayman Hamad with ABSAC will be monitoring the chat, and we'll be able to get our questions in front of the group for everybody. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ayman with ABSAC to start us off with a land acknowledgement.
Thank you. As we begin our Courageous Career event today, I invite all of us, I invite us all to respectfully acknowledge that our campus is on occupied Coast Salish land, specifically the land of the Duwamish, homelands of the Duwamish people. To acknowledge this land is to recognize the history and the legacy of settlers and colonialism. It is to recognize these lands, water, and their significance for the people who have thrived in this region despite the consequences of displacements and broken treaties. Let us take a moment to pause and pay respect to Coast Salish elders, past and present, and extend that respect to their descendants and all indigenous people.
Thank you. Thank you. And with that, we invite our guest this afternoon, Levongia Carrera, and you have the floor now. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Hi, everyone, and happy post-Mother's Day weekend to all the moms and the dads who did something special for the wives. I'm going to take you through just a quick agenda of what we're going to talk about today. And as was mentioned earlier by Mary, I'm going to talk about some of my personal experiences. And I just want to make sure you know I'm not an expert in this area. I'm a person just like you who have experienced different things and have recently experienced something just a week ago that I'll touch upon when we go through the discussion. So just real quick, there we go. I'll do a quick introduction of who I am so you kind of know who's talking. And then I'll kind of talk about the difference between pay equity versus pay equality. There is a difference there. It's subtle, but it's there. And then I'll throw in a few key facts and data. We won't go too far into those. I just kind of want to flash through those just so you can kind of see what some official data looks like. And then we'll quickly get to, okay, what are some of the things we can do? What some of the call to action items and personal things we can do, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Does that sound okay? All right. So who am I? I am professionally the Director of External Reporting and Technical Accounting at TrueBlue. Now, TrueBlue is a staffing company and it's public. And so my group, specifically, we handle all the external reporting to the Securities Exchange Commission, so all SEC reporting, and reporting to foreign governments as well. So that's my primary area professionally. I graduated from SU from the LIMA program in 2020 during COVID. We didn't even have the virtual walk, so we feel gypped, but we're gonna figure something out for our group. I'm also, as you can see in the pictures, a mom. My son is 15, just turned 15, and he's towered over all of us now, a few feet. I'm also a daughter. There's my mom there, and I'm a sibling of 5 kids. I'm the only girl. And then the other picture you see there, which is a house under construction, is my house being constructed in Colorado Springs. And we're going to be moving down there sometime end of August, beginning of September-ish, when the house is complete. Well, actually, we'll move down a little earlier and be temporary living. But in any case, we're moving down to be around family. So that is a little bit about who I am. And just so you know, my introduction to this pay equity and equality, some of it I learned as I was researching for this presentation, things I didn't really know existed at the time. Some of it I recognized immediately, like, yep, that happened to me. And so I'll kind of pepper some of that in as I'm walking through that so that you can kind of get a little bit of how that's shown up for me real life wise. And then when we get to the Q&A, I'll be curious to see if any of you guys have any experiences that you would like to speak about. And then if there's something on a slide, I know that we have a separate Q&A section, but if there's something on a slide that you have a question on, go ahead and raise your hand in the using the features here, and I'm happy to kind of pause and take those questions on those topics. So with that, what is pay equity versus pay equality? So most of us, I think, are pretty aware of the gender pay gap between men and female, but we may not be as familiar with pay equity versus pay equality. The pay equality and pay equity terms themselves, they refer to more statistically proven wage gaps between people of different genders and ethnicities. Now, the gender pay is often used as evidence that women are systematically underpaid doing the same work as men, right? Pay equity and equality consider different occupations that may lead to men earning more than women. And so it's looking at what's causing, what's the underlying cause. Men are more likely to go into some of the higher paying occupations, while women tend to go into some of the less pay that gives them more flexibility with their work-life balance. Additionally, while the pay gap often simply refers to just the gender pay gap, the idea of pay equality and pay equity may go further and compare pay inequalities between people of different ethnicities or abilities. It kind of brings in, if you've ever heard of the term intersectionality, and when you talk about race, this also blends into this area as well, because when we talk a little later about the different stratifications of Black, Hispanic, Asian, poor, all of those things have an intersectionality with pay equity and pay equality. And so that's where the pay equality or pay equity comes into place. It's addressing those intersectionalities. So pay equity, here's the definition. Pay equity is the idea that equal work should be given equal pay, or something like that, right? So equal work is a little hard to determine what's equal. So they've kind of adjusted a little bit to say equal or similar work, so that there's a little bit of nuance there. So it may not be exactly the same work, but that's the idea of pay equality, is that if you and I are doing basically the same thing, we should basically get the same pay if we have similar experiences and bring similar things to the table. According to pay equality, workers with comparable experience and education working in the same occupation at the same level are entitled to earn the same compensation. So that's pay equality, okay? So the pay equity follows similar thoughts here, but it adds additional details, which I kind of bullet pointed there on the slide. While pay equality is based on the idea that equal work should result in equal pay, pay equity goes deeper into the reasons behind why people are paid differently in the first place. So rather than simply looking at the disparity in earnings between people of different genders or ethnicities, pay equity explores the systemic issues, the conscious and unconscious biases, social norms, educational opportunities, and wealth that may be negatively impact women, people of color, or people who have marginalized identities. So a lot goes into pay equity. A lot more is considered when you're looking at pay equity versus pay equality. Equality is what you guys have all kind of heard about. And if you Google like pay equality or pay equity, you don't really get the definition of the true definition of pay equity. You get the definition of pay equality, right? So you have to be careful when you go out there and you look at what's being said out there, because they call everything pay equity, but they don't describe it the same way. They describe pay equity in most places as similar pay for similar work, but they don't go any further than that. And that is really pay equality, or equality, and not pay equity. So it's a little nuanced, but just to kind of forewarn you on that one. I started seeing that a little bit and started to get a little confused as I was doing my research, and then I had to go back to the definitions to get level set. So here's a few key facts. So here's what the census sent out in 2019 when they looked at the median weekly earnings for similar occupations by gender. So this is sort of the equality piece of it, right? And so what they said was women were paid 82.3 cents for every dollar paid to men. And then what this graph is showing you is the different ethnicities, both men and women, and what that looks like as far as the wage difference. And so you can tell on the graph where even though the white and Asian have the biggest difference, so what that means is that white women they're earning 78 cents basically is how that reads, versus say American Indian and Alaskan Native, they're earning 90 cents when it's compared to the men dollar. However, if you look at the dollars that we're talking about, the dollars themselves are much higher for the whites, much higher for Asians. So, it's, even though the disparity is there in that racial group, it really is higher than all the other ethnic groups. So there's still, you can see some of that disparity there. So here you'll see that, Black women were paid 62% of white non-Hispanic men's wages in 2018. And that did tip up in 2019 to 63%. And then Latinos were paid 54% of what white men were wages in 2018. And that tipped up a little bit to 55%. So there is some kind of closing of that little kind of disparity, but it's not a lot. There's a lot to go to get that back into alignment. And that was just before COVID. So now you layer in COVID. What happened in COVID? A lot of women left the workforce, right? Because no more daycare, schools closed. So they left the workforce. And anytime you leave the workforce and you try to re-enter, you lose money. You don't come in at the same level you left it. And even if you did, then you lost money because of time value of money. And so what we're probably going to see and what they're estimating is that, post-COVID, women and minorities are going to be pushed even further back. So when they do this study and they start to look at, where we at, there's going to be a regression in these numbers, which is unfortunate, but that's going to be the reality of why. Because COVID obviously disproportionately impacted in a negative way those people who are, minorities, low income, and all of those things. It just further created a bigger gap. Okay, so the next one I will show you is going to go into the whole kind of discussion about if you were doing similar work, are you getting the same type of pay? And then if you look at the work that's there, it's like maids, janitors, hairdressers, elementary school teachers, HR managers. And what you'll see is in every single case, no big surprise, the women are getting paid even less than the men. So even here, that's happening. And so why is that? And so there's a history here that goes all the way back to slavery. Back in the slavery times, segregation and the exploitation of immigrants created this deep, deep-rooted inequality that persists today. And a lot of the folks that were subjugated to that entered into these types of work areas, which were lower skilled. And so those areas always paid less. And so you're already paying less because you're going into a field that's paying you less money. And then once you get there, there's this disparity even more based on if you're male or female. So it just really is deep rooted. And so as a result, most women of color have not had or do they have now access to the same education and employment opportunities that white people have. For instance, Black women and Latinos are disproportionately working in service and domestic caregiving and I can't even say this, agricultural jobs, I can't even say the word, which have been systematically undervalued and undercompensated. So a little bit of what I just said, which is resulted in the wage gap for many women of color. But what you'll notice is that while the gaps for white and Asian women compared to white and non-Hispanic men remain significant, they have narrowed much more over the 30 years than the gap for Black women and Latinos. And I'm going to show you a graph that's going to show you what that looks like. It's a little messy, but it's an eye opener when you see this. And I'll go there now if I can find my clicker. So what is this showing you? This is showing you that, and I'll just jump to the punchline because this is the one that just shocked me. Black women's earnings ratios changed from 59% to only 63%, so only a 7% difference. And at this rate, the gap to close that is going to be 350 years. So in 2369, that's when Black women can see that gap close. Who's going to be here in 2369 that's on this call? Now, if you look at Asian women earnings, they increased 26%. So in 2041, in 22 years, they're expected to have that gap closed. Now go to Latina. Theirs is a 7% difference in the gap, and that's not expected to close until 350 years. So 2451. So the 4% difference that I'm talking about is the change in their earnings, right? And their earnings have not increased much. So this other graph that has all the squiggly lines and stuff is just kind of showing you each of those groups. So you see that the Asians are at the top, but they're going to be closing the gap in 2041. Oops, sorry, I clicked too soon. In 2041, whereas our Latina friends and family are not going to see it until 2451. So definitely a long ways, a lot of work needs to be done in order to make that happen a lot faster. And then this graph I threw in here because it was very interesting to see that with more education, the gap widens. But you would think you pay all this money for your education and you get to increase your salary and the gap closes. But in actuality, what this is telling us is that if you have a high school diploma, you may earn less, but the gap between you and white women is not going to be as, and white men, as great, right? But the more education everyone gets, the salaries that actually grow the fastest are the white men and white women. The Blacks may grow and the others may grow, but not at the same rate. In fact, the rate decreases, which creates a bigger wide discrepancy. So, you know, you got your PhD, you're like, I'm making the money, but then you look over and see that so-and-so is making 3 times what you think you making money, right? But they're making 3 times the same money doing the same job. You know what I mean? So, you know, this right here, I was like, okay, so I just paid how much for my MBA? And so what are you telling me right now? This is not fair. But this was based off of 2019, and I suspect because of COVID and a whole bunch of people who, you know, are impacted by this, you know, you're going to see this be an even bigger gap in all areas. So a lot of, you know, facts that can be a little depressing, but there's hope because there's some stuff going on that you should be aware of. And there's some stuff going on that you can actually do yourself. And I think that's the best part. And so Congress is going to be passing, hopefully, the Paycheck Fairness Act. And that is supposed to kind of strengthen the Equal Pay Act of 1963. The Pay Equity for All Act would prohibit employers from using salary history to set pay, okay? And the Fair Pay Act would require employers to provide equal pay for jobs of equivalent value to help reduce the impact of occupational segregation. Now, I do have something on that one, and that is if you are to look at some states that have passed this salary history ban, because it's not a federal government thing, it's all the states. There's probably about 30 states that have implemented some portion of this. About 16 have done a full state ban. California is one of those. I was looking at an opportunity in California, and I had a conversation just last week with the recruiter. Now the recruiter from the company is a brother. And when I say a brother, I mean a Black man. But in my mind, he should have known better, but he didn't. And so he made the unfortunate mistake of asking me, after I asked what the pay salary was for the position, he asked me what I was making. And unfortunately for him, I had already done some of my research. And so I let him know, first of all, I'm not interested in the job no more. But 2, you know, why that question is problematic. And I educated him on that. He knew, he's HR. But it just shows that people will try to perpetuate something that they know is not right because it benefits them in some form or fashion. But basically what this does is it helps if the salary history ban, what that does is it stops companies from perpetuating pay inequality. Because if you come out of college and you get your first job like me, and you don't know nothing about negotiation, you just know you got all this debt and you got a job that's gonna pay you X, right? And you're like, I'm taking it, right? You don't know whether or not you got the best deal, but you know that it's more than you were making the gap while you were at school. So you go for it. Well, when you start off at that low rate, trying to get back up to equality, equity, and all that is almost impossible. And so when a job that you go to, when you're moving from one job to the next, when they start asking, what are you currently making, so that they can gauge how much they want to offer you off of your base, they're going to continually keep you behind the 8 ball. And so this new law, or this law that's still kind of taking effect in different states, it's supposed to help in that area, and it has proven to do so, to have done so. In fact, I was looking at some statistics, and what it was saying was that if I go here, state and federal efforts to eliminate the use of salary history in the hiring process are working. So employers in states where salary history ban are advertising salaries more. So basically, when they put the job out there, they're also telling you what the salaries are ahead of time, so that you're not coming into it blind. And workers who change jobs in these states saw significant increases in the average pay compared to similar workers in states without bans. So like if I'm in the state of California, technically, no one's going to ask me how much am I currently making. When I go to apply for a job, I'm already going to be able to see what the salary is, and I'm going to be able to, you know, apply and get that salary if I get that job or more, but I'm not getting less, right? Based on what I'm currently making. And then the other thing that they noticed that the increases were actually driven by Black workers and women who changed jobs. So obviously the folks that were mostly at the bottom of this are greatly benefiting when that ban is in place. So there's definitely some benefit to having that in place. And then the other thing that I would say is, and so what do you do as an individual? So we kind of talked about what Congress is doing. I kind of missed one of them, but it's generally the same kind of thing. So what can we do as individuals, especially people who are coming, you know, out of school and ready to get into the workforce, and, you know, what's what? So what I wish I had done when I was in college was someone tell me more about how to research and investigate what is the going rate for something like the profession that I'm going into, so that I have an expectation of what I should be saying coming across that table and have a basis of negotiation. I just didn't have that knowledge to do that. And today, and although it says American Association of University Women, it's not just for women. Today, there's different programs. This is one that I found where you can actually take a course, online course or in person, and they will teach you how to research positions, the proper or what to expect in the salary for that position, and how to negotiate when you get in front of a company. And then, which I thought was really good. And the other nice thing about this is that they have a student wage for this. And so it's only $18.81 to sign up if you're a student. And you can actually go in and start to learn how do you negotiate your salary. Now, obviously there's you know, states that are going to be more helpful to you if you're in those states. In that graph that I have there of the states, the stuff in purple or orange, I'm sorry, those are, they already have a salary history bands there. The ones that are gray have not yet gotten to that point. So if you're in one of the orange areas like Washington is, you definitely have that benefit of the salary history band to help you. I actually am done. So that is it in a nutshell, guys. A little bit about, you know, how I've been impacted by that. And, you know, the other thing that I will say is one of the other negotiation tools that I found is if I find a job and they are about to pay me more money and I can negotiate where I'm at that point, when they know that I have an offer on the table for X amount of dollars, which has happened for me with me at this current job. It is another leverage when you are negotiating at your current job to get your salary back up to where it should be, is, you know, start shopping around, look for some other companies to go to who see the worth, but don't tell them how much you're currently making, and give the current employer an opportunity to make it right, or you just, you know, jump ship. And so that's pretty much my story. I'm sticking to it. And I'll open the floor to some questions.
Thank you. Please feel free to type in your questions in the chat on unmute. And Amen, Ayman had some questions that the student Absac had put together, so he could maybe pull from that.
I was actually going to pull from that, but I actually have even a different question now listening to some of this discussion. So in your last, I think it's the last slide, you spoke about, companies cannot ask you how much you're making today, right? To use that as a salary point, right? But from what I've seen from my experiences, a lot of them will be like, uh, and they'll ask it from a total compensation. Nobody's gonna, they're not gonna come out and say this is your salary for the year. But a lot of them is like, well, what are your total compensation look like, right? And things like that. So I'm just from that aspect, is it also fair to say, under this state law or rule, then you cannot ask me that question? And I'm hoping you can speak a little bit about that. And I think a lot of students feel like if they said that, then that could be used, or could be a point of retaliation against them, or that they don't want to share this. Also, a lot of people are afraid of that being a negative impact on their interview process.
Yeah, so when you research the states that have the history bans, you're going to find that there's different nuances to their bans. They're not all the same. So, for example, there are a few states that say you can, if you have less than X amount of employees, then you don't have to follow this rule. If you have all these employees, you got to follow this rule. There's some that say you can't ask it a certain kind of way. So, for example, they'll say you can't ask them their salary, what they're making right now, but you could ask them what's your expected salary, right? Because they're trying to get at where do you think, because if you think you're at, say 50,000, and you're probably going to give a number that's based off of that 50,000 versus them telling you we budgeted X amount of dollars for this position, and these are the qualifications that we have for this position. And by you speaking at first, it's like any negotiation rule. By you speaking up first about where you are or what you expect, you're setting a peg that could be over here, and now they get to shift everything down. So, you kind of have to do your homework first before you get into that conversation with them and understand what's going on. If you're using a recruiter, for example, the first thing you want to ask that recruiter before they start asking you anything is what is the range, the pay range for this, and what are all the compensation things that they have in there. Even the recruiter, unless they're a retained search, you need to keep them at bay with any detailed information about what you're currently making. You need to let them know my expectation is X, and that's because you did some homework. So you can't go into these things without doing some homework and some research, or else you will be left flat-footed, because you will be at the mercy of, do I not answer the question and then really mess up my opportunities now, or but if you've done your research, you can, if they want to ask you something like that and you've done your research and that this salary is paying this range and this, wherever it is, then you go for the top of that range. Let them bring you down. That's negotiation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a negotiation skill class 101, right? So
yeah, I mean, don't peg it because of you're looking at, okay, I'm making X, and so you're thinking, oh, 50% is not bad, or 20% is not bad, but then they're budgeting a salary that would actually be 100%, and I'm using some outlandish percentages, but I'm just saying, for example, especially now that everything can be remote, let's just say you're looking at a job in California and it's a remote opportunity. Well, they're budgeting for that job as if they were paying somebody to do it who lives in that state. They're not necessarily looking to create a budget based on where that person who's worked remote lives, right? So if you're smart and if you're looking for a position that allows you to have that remote opportunity, look in those states that are high cost of living. That's another way to do it.
okay. Yeah, I got a couple more, but I want to open up the floor to the rest of the student body before before bringing up a couple more questions as well.
Hi, I actually have a question about the salary history ban.
Yeah.
So since it doesn't apply in every single state, I was wondering if you're working at a company where they have locations in multiple states, does that mean that the recruitment process and the hiring process would be unequal in that way for different candidates? Like if they're in a state where there is a salary history ban, then they wouldn't have to tell their salary, whereas if there's someone else in another state without that ban, because I'm also thinking just in terms of like company culture and trying to create an equitable process. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that in terms of like the hiring process maybe being inequitable in that way, depending on location. And then also if that's the case, or even if you're just in a state where there is no salary history ban, your recommendations on how to, if you're in like an HR function, how you could start to have a conversation about maybe introducing that process, even if it's not required by law to not require a salary history. So sorry, that's like two questions.
Well, in general, there are benefits to having equity and consistency amongst all your areas if you're a corporation when it comes to this, because what they found is that when people feel like they're being paid and compensated equally and fairly, you get more efficiency, you get less retention, less turnover, and you create a culture where people want to come to work, and it creates and impacts that culture of the company. So there's that other side. It's almost like trying to tell people why diversity is great, right? You know, it's great because it creates a culture of inclusiveness, right? And when everyone can bring their authentic self to work, you're going to get more out of them. Some of those same arguments they're finding when it comes to this pay equity. So can they, if like say a company that's based in California, who obviously falls under the California rules, has offices in other places or other states where that ban does not exist, could they technically, legally do it? I guess so. You know, I'm not a lawyer, but if they're in that state, operating in that state, hiring people in that state, and they're following the state rules, which don't include the ban, I guess they could, but should they? And so that's really the question, is should they? So if they have bought into it, then they probably won't. Most companies that are finding that the benefits of doing the pay equity and not asking for the salary and all that kind of stuff, history, they have other things that they're thinking. They're incorporating other things than just that. You know, they are looking at their people. They are caring about their people. They are probably have other initiatives that support this, and so it's probably an enterprise-wide initiative. But if there are companies who are just doing it for compliance purposes in that state, of course that can create some issues for them, and it may already be doing that for some companies. I don't know. I would just think that if the state allows it, then you have that risk that a company may follow and be varied in different areas. So if you're in HR, I think the research or the argument that you want to do is to look for the research that supports a cohesive approach to this, even if you're a company that's not necessarily in a state that requires it, is to go ahead and do it anyways. You don't have to wait for a law. And then to be consistent in all parts of the organization, because it creates the transparency that creates more people feeling more comfortable in their company, and definitely lifts the morale of the organization. So there's more of that soft side of it, and then there's probably even an ROI to it that you can kind of factor into it, similar to how we've had in the past had to prove D&I has an ROI for the bottom line. I think you find that this also does as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
I tried to hit some of these questions that was on this list. One of them was, why is pay equity a social justice issue, which I think we kind of discussed earlier in the slides when we were showing, you know, the disparity and the intersectionality of how this impacts communities. What are some of the long-term impacts of being underpaid on individuals? Like we kind of covered that as well, is that it keeps you behind the 8 ball as people keep asking you what your what your salary is, where you're at. And it also affects families, if you think about it, because, you know, families are bringing less money into their homes. Kids are have less resources. They may not be able to go to certain universities because resources are less, and they're relegated to more of those jobs that are lower paying. So it just kind of perpetuates the pain. What are some of the fallouts for a company for not achieving pay equity? We kind of discussed the turnover, low morale, right? What is the best way to bring up the pay equity discussion with management if he or she feels undercompensated? I kind of mentioned, you know, one of the things you can do is have a conversation with them if you feel comfortable. But the other one is get some leverage. You know, start looking at other companies, start interviewing on the side, get a feel for what are other people willing to pay you to do what you're doing, and compare that to where you're at. Get an offer on the table and present it, and use it as leverage. That's another way to do it. What does it mean to close the pay equity gap? Well, we kind of talked about, you know, closing that gap means you're starting to pay folks who have been underpaid more, and it's more in line with what the whites and all those that have higher pay for doing the same work. So you're bringing that difference closer together. And should the pay compensation be only a factor? It's not necessarily the only factor. There's education involved as well, and the experiences that you're bringing to the table. So not just the pay. Actually what it was is, should the pay compensation be the only factor when making decisions on a job offer in an early career? So only no, but you have to be careful when you're looking at your first job coming out of college. If you factor in some of the non-financial benefits, you have to be cognizant of the fact that if you sacrifice your salary at that point, it's going to follow you, unless you get into a situation with these new laws where you can break away from that and be able to say, I've got these experiences, here's the pay range for this position. I'm not going to tell you what I'm making because I took a hit because I wanted other things. And so I've done my research. I know what you're paying for this. And so I'm shooting for the top of that range. And you're gonna have to tell me how come I can't get that, right? So be careful, you know, letting people talk you out of the money, because it could impact you on the, you know, down the road, for sure. And then the last one that I saw on here is, what are the most important things to keep in mind during salary negotiations for your first job? And I think we kind of talk about it. It's research, 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 research. Get out there and research. There's some things that are free. There's some things you have to pay for. This website, American Association of Women, of University Women, they have a program. You can get in there for $16, take a course, learn negotiation skills, learn how to research pay ranges for different positions in different states. They have you'll have access to a lot of information through there. I even think even in the Seattle University's kind of library, I think there's stuff there where you can kind of research a lot of information that you would ordinarily have to actually pay for if you were to try to do it just on a Google search. There's a lot of stops on the Google search that will start asking you for money to get more information about pay ranges.
There are a couple of questions on the chat.
Okay.
And actually, in addition, I wanted to add in the chat was PayScale, which is a local company, has several free resources. You can also do research on compensation and salary and benefits calculator is one I would recommend. So there's a question here. How about talking about, I think this is related to pay transparency. Do you have any advice on asking coworkers about their compensation? Or
Yeah.
and add to that, you know, how should companies become more transparent about compensation? And I think because this is where sort of this inequity and inequality is happening because of sort of the taboo about not talking about compensation.
Yeah, that's tough. It all depends on how comfortable you are with your coworkers, for one, because you may get an answer you don't like, but you may not get an answer at all because they may feel like you're imposing or you're being nosy into their business. I think companies that are willing to be more transparent in their structure of this position has this salary range and it's public for everyone in the organization, I think that's the only way you really get there, because putting the onus on like us workers to go ask another worker how much you're making, it's a very difficult situation to be put in unless you guys are best of buddies or something like that. It's really hard to put that person in that position to ask somebody, you know, how much they're making. But I think the key is going to be companies. A lot of work has to be done by these companies to kind of take the onus on themselves to make the cultural change. And I think as people are going into these companies, especially if you're going into an HR function, that might be a great opportunity to start socializing that idea of, you know, creating transparent pay ranges for different positions in the organization that are consistent across the board. And the range would also take into consideration experience levels, skill sets, and all that stuff. But it's the range, it's the set range. So you're somewhere in there for that position. So if you get that position or you move from one position to the other, you know what range you're moving into, right? I think that's the way to get, that's where you want to go. I don't know of any companies personally that are currently doing that, but I suspect there's probably some companies doing that.
Thank you. And then another question is, you know, nowadays there seems to be a greater emphasis on comparable experience, not just academic credentials. So how could one factor this into their pay conversation? So, and we're seeing this a lot now, especially with organizations trying to close sort of that education or academic gap where experience is now a factor. You know, instead of saying a 4-year bachelor's degree, they could say, you know, 5 years experience.
Right.
Bachelor's degree. So how do you bring up that in the pay conversation?
As the person with the experience versus the person with the education?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. So I'm in the market right now looking for people. The market is tight. Historically, when I brought people into my group, we got them straight from public accounting, which is sort of the university of the work that I do. It doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily the experience that they'll be doing with me, but it gives them the education to do it. And that has dried up. So I've had to shift even my job description to say either that or the experience. And the experience is just as great because it allows you to plug and play, right? So if you've got the experience doing exactly what that job is asking for, irregardless of whether or not you have that education, I would play up the fact that you can plug and play. And once you walk in the door, you may have to learn some of the processes, but you know how to do the work. And you're proven commodity. And so if I was someone with the experience and not necessarily with the education, I would definitely highlight how my experience doing exactly what they need will reduce the learning curve time. It will increase the efficiency of me coming in and being able to plug into the organization and start adding value immediately.
Thank you. Other questions? I'm just going through the chat real quick and seeing if I missed anything. Ayman, any questions?
Oh, you're on mute.
I think it hits, you guys were able to address all the questions that we had on that list.
Is there anyone that had any experiences with pay equity or inequality that's willing to share some of their experiences? Or is everyone here not hit the workforce yet?
I have a few experiences, I mean, for myself and also my family. So my family is actually from the United States territory. And so back there, there was, I mean, in decades previously, there was a lot of systematic inequality between how the natives were paid versus how like white Americans who, you know, were flown in to live there were paid. We saw that a lot in our culture and something that we talk about. And then also just with my family, just seeing pay inequality, like with my mother, because she has a medical degree, but she would find out that she was paid less than her white male counterparts quite often. So the point that you made about as your education increases, the gaps increase. I saw that with my own family, with my own mother, which was just devastating, you know, just to be like, you work so hard. And then also just the experience of my mom being a first generation college student. So all of the struggle and the lack of support, you know, of going through that to finally make it, and then to realize, oh, there's this pay gap going on. And so, you know, seeing that firsthand with her and pretty much, I would say, all the women in my family. And then for myself, I have definitely an experience with the salary history. When I did my first job transition, this was like in 2015, so it was before the salary history ban came into play. My first job, I did not get paid very much, but I was doing like, you know, I was doing all the work that was required. And so when I transitioned, they asked me for my salary. And so I knew that pretty much they were going to offer me less than what I could have, and that's ended up that ended up happening. So what you were saying about you need to be really careful with your first job right out of college is really important. Because actually what even motivated me to look for another role outside my first company was a colleague. You know, she found out how much I was making and she was just like, you need to leave because that's just going to impact you for years to come. Like right now you may not see it, but like in 5-10 years time. And so then also kind of tied into that is the number of job transitions I've had to make over the years just to get a salary increase, because it wasn't going to happen at my current place. And so luckily though, at my current place, I actually I've been interning there and I just received a full-time offer yesterday. And I feel like for the first time, it was like the first time where they didn't, you know, because they didn't ask for my salary history. Now I know it's because we have a salary ban, right? It was actually the first time where I felt like, yeah, like this offer is like, this is what I expect to get for like my amount of education and experience and whatnot. So yeah, like everything you were saying, it just hit all those points for me, both like personally, what I've seen in my own family and culture. So definitely appreciate you giving this information and these resources, because I'm going to definitely be sending these resources to people in my cultural community, because lately we've been doing a big push to try to have more pooling our resources to help each other out, especially as the next generation is wanting to get higher education and move into the workforce. So yeah, so that's my story. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, well, make sure you add the other sites that Carol mentioned. I don't know, Carol, if
Yeah.
you want to email that out to everyone, since it's not on the slide, since you
Okay,
had a few other places that could help folks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think go
I'll
ahead,
save
Carol.
them all and issue that and send them, including I have a resource which has also the different state laws around that. So I'll add that.
Okay, and I just as another follow-up to Scholar's story as personal, right? Graduating out of from an HBCU as a engineering students, when I compared the salary to some of the other people that I knew, it was decent amount. So I thought, this is going to be a really good paying job. So I went in, and 5 years down the road, when I did another point of comparison, I found that my track of moving up or that salary increase was at a lot lower rate compared to the other folks. So it's not just about coming in. Even if you come in at a higher salary, you just gotta, keep your foot on the pedal with the
That's a
yearly
good point.
salary increases. Yep,
That's a good point. So they will level you out if you're not paying attention.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Iron, you bring a good point up. We have seen sometimes at the college level, both men and women may even start out the same, but 2 years in, around the time where you're getting more responsibilities or something, you start to see the gap begin to grow by gender and then by ethnicity and race. It starts and it just gets wider and wider, even though you may have started at the same pace. And there's many things, as Levongia was mentioned earlier, is that systematic things that happen. So some women start to plan families and things, and they start to remove themselves mentally from the workplace and take the foot off the gas pedal in terms of negotiating and the benefits and things like that. But we just have to keep at it to make sure that we are getting, what's due and what's right and what's fair.
And there's the intersectionality that plays into that, crosses over into whether or not when you go into that company, is there people that look like you looking out for you? Are you being mentored? Are you being coached? Historically, that hasn't been the case. You usually are kind of left at your own devices, and you're not really coached or mentored, and you don't necessarily have someone up higher up that's really championing you and giving you the good projects and giving you all these things that can help you demonstrate your skills and ability or make them or grow, and so some of that has that effect of stalling you out, because now you're no longer, you may have come in at this kind of, level with the same folks, but then when they stepped in, they got all the coaching, the mentoring, they got projects sent to them. So they got to go a lot faster, where, you're kind of just swimming out there on your own, not necessarily having anyone who's coaching you or supporting you or championing you. And so, you just get shoved to the side, and you get, what is that called? Cost of living increases, 3, maybe 2.5% a year. That's the other thing to do, is when you are looking at going into a company, start looking around. One of the things I started asking, it's like, okay, can I see if they were not a public company and I couldn't see who their executive team is? I started, what's the diversity of the people reporting to you? What's the diversity of the people at your level? What's the diverse? I want to know what does it look like? Because that's going to tell me when I walk in, do I have anyone I can look to support me? Because it's very hard to go into a company and not have the support you need to help you navigate the land, right? And get those experiences that propel your career. We got to ask these questions. Some folks don't have to ask that question because it's an automatic. It's kind of built into the system that they're going to get that in some form or fashion, because somebody's going to look just like them and they're going to gravitate. And that happens when you see someone that looks like you. It's just natural to gravitate and to make a personal connection. So make sure you guys are looking and asking questions about diversity wherever you go. Ask.
Excellent advice and to close us out this afternoon. Thank you so much for your wonderful, insightful talk with us. We love chatting with you. We hope you'll return, and we're so grateful that you're an alum, so you totally get where we're coming from, and the information you provided is so relevant to us. So we appreciate your time. And I also want to thank the Albers Placement Center, as well as the Albers Black Students and Alumni Council for being our student sponsor for today's Courageous Career Conversation. And this has been a very timely topic, especially as we are coming to a close where a majority of our students will be entering the workforce in a few months here, if not already. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy
Thank
the
you,
rest
guys.
of your
Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.